hear myself through my headphones. Yes, man. Like, I feel real good about this right now.
Pay attention, because you are now listening to Permission to Speak Freely.
Hey, listeners, y'all know how I feel about intros, right? But y'all also know that when people deserve to be introduced, I try to make sure that I make the most out of it. So today we are joined by U.S. Navy captain retired in 2013. 30 years of service. In those 30 years, commanded 2 warships, the USS Oscar Austin, that's a DDG, and a USS San Jacinto, a cruiser. Also, Surfland Chief of Staff did a tour there. That was the last tour, Twilight Tour. Received the U.S. Navy League's John Paul Jones Award in 2010 for inspirational leadership. Currently a human factors engineer, a sleep advocate, USNI and ASNE Author of the Year, and countless accolades and achievements. Countless accolades and achievements. So that's Dr. John P. Cordle, everybody. So we are joined by Dr. John P. Cordle. How you doing, Doc?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks a lot. And it's John, or my wife had lots of other names for me, but I'll leave that to her.
Okay, that's good then. Hey, the first thing that I want to ask you about is your LinkedIn page, your bio, right? It has you as a prolific, disruptive thinker, right?
Right.
And did you name yourself that, or did somebody else call you that?
That's a pretty funny story. So I started, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, but I've written over the years probably about 50 different articles and proceedings and SEMSEC over stuff from leadership to manning to diversity and inclusion, all sorts of articles, and sometimes kind of push the envelope a little bit. And I published one about redoing the operational fleet response plan, like how we deploy our ships. And a friend of mine, Captain Matt Wellman over at Fleet Forces, posted it and said he'd read a bunch of my stuff, and he said, John, on his post, John is a prolific, disruptive thinker. If you look on LinkedIn a lot, you see that everybody has letters after their name, like MSSE and PE and DDR and all this. I don't know what that stuff is, and so I just made up my own set of letters. I just said a P with a little D and a T, and put it on there and said prolific, disruptive thinker, kind of as a joke. And then people started calling me that, and I'm like, well, I guess I'll let it stick. And then, so fast forward about 6 months, and I get this email at work on my NMCI account from the Chief of Staff of Fleet Forces, and I'm connected with some folks. So from my Navy time, a lot of my folks have risen to pretty high places, and so Admiral Cordle at Fleet Forces was putting together a leadership symposium for his flag officers on the East Coast, about 100 of them, and he wanted a disruptive thinker as a speaker. He said that. And he goes, and his Cos goes, hey, I saw some guy on LinkedIn. And so next thing you know, I have a speaking engagement in front of like all the flag officers and on the East Coast over at Fleet Forces, sponsored by Admiral Cordle. So it got me in the door. So I kept it,
Yeah. So this is how I see you, though. I see you as like, and I'm going to paint the whole picture. Hey, for the listeners, I'm going to paint the whole picture. Sorry, y'all. But I see you as like the guy, like, we're traveling, right? We doing travels. We trying to find like some land, some foreign land, that like the land of milk and honey or something, right? And I see you as the guy that like we send out, or the guy that goes out before everybody else and like surveys the land and finds out, what's good in the land and what's bad in the land. Right now, let's say that it's some goodness in the land, right? It's some people that just gonna stay there, right? The milk and honey, the songbirds, everything is just beautiful. They just gonna stay there and not even tell everybody else about what's over on that side. But I see you as the person that's gonna come back down the hill, go back around that mountain, and let everybody else know what's going on that other side. So I see you as a messenger, of some sort. And you're not going to take information and holster it. You're going to always pass it off. So especially with some of like the recent things, like when I'm looking at like DEI and some of the recent things that I see from you, because my question for that is, that's not something that the information that you have about like DEI and the insight that you have, that's not something that you always had, right? That's some stuff you learn, right?
No, not at all. So I don't know. Can I do a little bit of a bio to set the stage to answer your question?
Yeah.
So I grew up. My dad was military. My mom was a teacher. He was a aviation bosun mate. Served on carriers and battleships, and he got commissioned. Was an ordnance officer. So I lived in 13 different states growing up, and we settled in Rome, Georgia, which is a small town northeast Georgia. And I went to a private school, but Rome is kind of a it's about maybe 50, it's about maybe 60,000 people, about, demographically about half white and about half African American or Hispanic, but very bifurcated. Everybody lives on one side of town and everybody lives on the other side of town, right? And so I drove my little Nash Rambler station wagon through the poorest, blackest part of town to a all white private school for 4 years, right?
Yeah.
And then joined the Navy at 18 and came up to Annapolis. And again, Carl Darden was the only black man in our entire 90-person company. And so, I lived a very insulated life, right? And then 30 years in the Navy, we pride ourselves on being, colorblind or color neutral, or, they're all sailors, it doesn't matter. So I never, I never had to deal with racism and prejudice and bias because it wasn't shoved to my face, right? I mean, I talked about it and I dealt with it. And then passed all the way up to 2020. I've been retired for 10 years. And I'm on LinkedIn and I see Keith Green, this guy that I didn't know who he was. But he's sort of inflammatory, right? He posts things that are make you think, and they make you look, and make you look at history. And then somebody jumped on him for, I think, race baiting is what they said, because he talked about being discriminated against. And I posted on LinkedIn that, hey, you shouldn't talk like that on this forum. And then Keith reached out to me. I talked to him. He sent me a copy of his book. I don't know if I've showed this, Black Officer, White Navy. And there's two people that have changed my life. I'll talk about Dr. Anita Shattuck later, because she got me on the road to sleep studies and stuff like that. But he started making me read stuff, think differently about the way I saw the world, kind of through his eyes. And so we could talk about some of those specifics, but the more he talked, the more I realized that, man, I had no idea the stuff I didn't know. I'm talking to him. I was talking with a friend of mine, a 05 commander at work, who was taking his kid up to college in Richmond, and he got stopped by the police. Sort of driving while black, right? And you hear people say that. I said, well, wow, how many times has that happened to you? And he said, oh, this is my 31st time. And I'm like, holy mackerel, So anyway, so there were three things in Keith's book, amongst all the other ones. It's a great book if you get a chance to read it. The serial folliculus barbae, the beard, right? The skin condition, and what that really means, which I had no idea. He talks a lot about the John C. Stennis, which we've written about, and how you have an aircraft carrier named for someone who was a segregationalist. And then I'm sure you remember Task Force 1 Navy, which was put together, to have those difficult discussions and have all this stuff happen. There's a big diversity, equity, inclusion. The Navy's all over it. And then there was a lot of pushback. And then suddenly, nowadays you can't even say that word. It was funny. I posted something on LinkedIn yesterday, and if you looked at you missed one on my profile. It says DEI advocate. And this commenter out of the blue on an unrelated post put DEI advocate in quotations and the vomit emoji. Right.
Yeah.
And then I watched the Navy just run away from that word, right? From that whole idea. They sort of roll it in culture of excellence. We could talk about that a little bit later too. But so my point is, there's times in life you realize that you just didn't know what you didn't know. And for me, that was 2020. A lot of stuff going on, Black Lives Matter and everything else in the world right there, COVID and all that stuff. But I think for whatever reason, like you said, I feel like when everybody kind of turned away, I kept going and found some other stuff out there. And so it really has opened my eyes. And then, of course, as you know, you start talking to other people and they introduce you to other people. And next thing you know, you're hearing a story that you never would have heard before, from folk. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of a long answer to that, to where that turn. It came for me 10 years after I retired, literally. And it's been interesting to watch some of the reactions to it. from my longtime friend as well, too. You know,
I
I bet.
I could imagine. Does hindsight ever teach you any lessons about your former self? You ever look back now that you have this new information, like, dag, I could have done this differently or anything like that?
You know, I've looked back. And again, maybe I was oblivious to it, but I had, you know, obviously, you know, Oscar Austin, my command tours, very diverse crew. And although, you know, I think my first 5 ships were all male, right? I think the Cole was the first time I had a female crew member. But I think I've always been very accepting of people and haven't really made a big deal about it. And I liked all those different diversity months just because of all the food. You know, we always had some great meal associated with whatever month it was. So I was all over that stuff. So I think I was pretty, you know, when I talk to folks now who used to work with me then, it's not like I was that clueless. But and I thought back, I had one case that I took. We took a gentleman to mast on the pole, where I wouldn't say it was racially motivated, but it was. I think he was treated differently, maybe because of his race. I'm not sure about that, but it was a guy sailor had been late for work a few times, and he was a single parent, and then somehow he kind of got painted by the chain of command as lazy and not, not being squared away when in general he kind of was. And I think back and I asked specifically, if there's any chance this is racially motivated. And of course, everybody said no, but I look back and everybody that I asked was white, And so did I miss something? Because now I have found, I'm probably going to regret saying this, but in general, the single parents that I had when they were sailors, the female single parents usually had their act together. The male single parents usually struggled. That's probably a generalization. This
I could believe
black,
it.
Right?
I can believe it because when my wife is like busy or she goes somewhere, like I always start off at like loss. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that?
I go right back to caveman status. I mean, it's embarrassing. But So no, I wouldn't say there was anything I would go back and say, wow, I really screwed that up. But I think I didn't take the time to learn and listen like I could have. That could have resulted in maybe some better outcomes. But no, I wish I could pin something specific, but I really can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about the war room? Because I know this officer wrote a book about, I'm assuming some of the experiences take place in a war room. Right? In a black officer, what is it? Black officer, white
Yeah, black
Navy?
officer, white Navy. Yeah, Keith, he was enlisted. He dropped out of high school to get out of, his dad was, I think, a postmate chief. And he talks about how he, worked his way through I think it was a Seaman Naval program that Admiral Board put together, if I remember right. I can't remember exactly, but he became an officer. But it's funny, he talks about one ship almost went to security alert because this guy walks up, black officer with a beard, right? Because he had the PFP chit. And they didn't think there was such a thing as a black lieutenant. And so they figured it must be some sort of a trick. Remember, this is back in like 1975, 1980. And there weren't many. And so, so the wardrobe, it's interesting. I was, one of the other things I've done is I joined these affinity groups like NNOA, ANZO, the Joint Women's Leadership Symposium or SSLA. And I was on a podcast not long ago, like last year. And there was a black officer who said, one of my friends, there's only 2 of us on the ship that are black. And my friend won't eat in the wardroom because he just doesn't feel like he's welcome there. And this is on a Navy ship today, right? And so I don't think the wardrooms that I've been in have been pretty diverse too. As you know, the enlisted ranks are a lot more diverse, I think, than the officer ranks. Especially you look at the Naval Academy; it's very, I think it's like 80-something% white. So we still have a very different set of diversity in the wardroom compared to everywhere else. But it's been generally, I haven't seen problems there that have been in my face. But again, like I said in the beginning, I'm not sure that I would have had those things shoved in my face like maybe somebody else would have, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm like, while we talking, I'm thinking about like, we recently did an episode. I think you said you saw it with Commander Walker. And I think for like 10 to 15 minutes, we talked about diversity in that episode. And like one of the YouTubers, they made a comment and they was like, "Oh man, it's 2024. We still talking about racism?" And so he probably gonna hate this episode because we gonna be talking about diversity through through a lot of it. Maybe he just stopped following us. So
I've lost a few on followers. It's funny you say that though. So one of the things that I look at every year, I don't know if you've seen this document. It's called the Health of the Force. The My Navy HR folks put it out, right? And buried in there is a really, I think, a pretty interesting graph. It's one they ask. Does the Navy have a racism problem, and does the Navy have a sexism problem? Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen that particular graph?
No, I haven't.
So it's a little bar graph. It's like red is yes and blue is no. And if you look at the graphs, it's like they're mirror images of each other. Like 75% of men say there's not a sexism problem, and 75% of women say there is. And then 75% of white sailors say there's not a racism problem, and 75% of black sailors say there is. And so, to me, I mean, that picture right there is an incredible statement that they just brush right past, right? I mean, nobody really talks about it. There's a little blurb at the bottom of it that says there is a disparity. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of a big deal, right? If 75% of your minority sailors think there's a racial issue, there kind of is, right? I mean, even if I think, right? Because they feel that way. And so the other thing is people say, well, there are no racist policies or there are no racist, but policies, we'll talk about the beard policy. They can have secondary effects that only impact one group of people. I don't know, Denise, I forgot that. Are you active duty or have you been?
Tisha?
Tish?
No, I just retired.
I'm sorry.
I retired last year.
Wow. How many years?
20.
Okay. So, women's hairstyles, right, have been through major overhauls.
Yes.
Over the year. And we always threw out these things, ponytails are unsafe because you get them wrapped around a motor shaft in the engine room and get your head, your neck snapped. And then suddenly we allowed ponytails. And the last I heard, nobody had their neck snapped, And so,
it's like a cartoon. That's like things like that happen in cartoons, man.
Yeah, right. But not in real life, right? But those were, discriminatory policies, right? It was, and who's making the rules? It's a bunch of men, right? And so, so it's not necessarily like right in your face. Oh, this is discriminatory, but if it has a discriminatory impact, as Keith would say, it's discriminatory, right? So those are the kind of the things that I've tried to highlight, and with some success. I wouldn't say great success, but it's just hard to get people to look at something and not think that they already know everything about it, and then say, "Oh, maybe I should listen or read or ask somebody that has a different perspective than I do." So that's the challenge, I think.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you a question before we got into much about it, and I think you kind of took me right. No, you kind of walked me right to it. So when I was a junior sailor, I was actually stationed in Annapolis before, and I was the second class, and I would always be the one that like brought up problems, right? I would also have solutions because somebody told me before, don't bring up a problem without a solution. So I would always have a problem and a solution, right? It would be funny. It would be funny, like just to replay it in my mind. Well, who's going to fix it? And then I'd be like, me, right? But but I felt like it was a time that like for me to be the person bringing up the problem, I felt like sometimes it became stale to the people that would listen because it was always me being the person that was bringing up the problem or seeing a thing. So what I wanted to ask you was, do you ever get to where you feel like, man, is this landing on deaf ears? I found something else that we need to take a look at. Is this landing on deaf ears or not?
Absolutely. I had a flag officer pull me aside, and I had offered to talk about the beard issue at a sort of a training symposium. And he said, John, I hate to tell you this, but you might not be the right person to carry that message because as soon as you start talking about something like that, they just tune you out. Because you talk about it so much. And I said, well, I talk about it so much because nobody will listen. And, so So absolutely, I have been, I've literally been told that on a couple of issues. The challenge is, and I don't know, maybe I'm missing it, but I don't hear a lot of other people talking about it. So that tells me one of two things: either maybe I'm just sort of in an echo chamber, and I'm the only one that cares. But then I sit and listen. Like, I hopefully we'll get a little bit into the beard thing later on. But I gathered about 15 sailors that have PFB from Surfland into a room, and I said, "Tell me, answer two questions: have you been personally or professionally disadvantaged from the fact that you had this facial hair on your face?" And the stories I got were heartrending. I mean, it was horrible. One young JG, so the Naval Academy, he was forced to dry shave in front of his peers because his shit expired. Right, so he has PFB. He has, like scars on his face from being forced to shave. And they publicly embarrassed him because it's not like his condition went away, but his shit expired, right? He didn't get it renewed. And so my point is, by listening to those folks, I just got so fired up to go talk about it some more, which made people turn me off even more because now I was really pissed them off, And so I've challenged multiple flag officers, master chiefs. Hey, just do what I did, right? It wasn't hard. I put out an email, said, "You have PFB, show up at 10 o'clock in the conference room," and asked them two questions. And I sat and listened for an hour. It's not rocket science, right? And I learned so much because there's so many misconceptions out there about, just for example, PFB. But one of the statements that stuck with me was one of the chiefs said, "I get you, sir." Because I said, "Why aren't you guys speaking up more about this if you feel this strongly about it?" He goes, "If the organization that you work for and you kind of love is discriminating against you, it's really not in your best interest to point that out." And that stuck with me as, at some point, another gentleman, a lieutenant, who he applied for a flag lieutenant position, like a front office position. And he had PFB and a legitimate chit. And he went for his interview. And when he left the interview, one of the officers came with him out to the lobby and said, "You're pretty high up there for the job, but man, that beard's got to go." Right. And so he went back and shaved it off. And he goes, he called it a black tax. He said, "That's just a thing that I have to do that because I'm black, that it's the cost of doing business." Right. And so in his mind, he had so maybe I am making too big of a deal about it, but I would not have had to do that as a white person, right? And so he felt like that's just something you have to do to get along. So I don't know. It's like the Stennis thing. We'll talk about that later on too. But literally, Keith and I are the only two people that are writing about that. Although it has made it in the congressional record, but again, it would require kind of going deep into the history to really understand the influence that person had. But yeah.
So PFB, right? I think you're the only person I've ever heard pronounce the P word.
I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have done that 3 years ago. Never, ever. Okay. I've been I practiced for this. I practiced for this episode. I want to screw it up.
In the mirror,
right. Sure.
But so me, I had a no shave shit back when I was on shore duty.
Right.
I had PFB, and I went up for. I probably told this story on here, so I'm gonna shorten it. But I went up for seller the quarter. Right. And I had a beard. And who I would have considered a mentor at the time, and who I still do consider a mentor at the time, he came up to me, and he was like, "Hey," he was a black commander. Right. He was like, "Hey, if I was you, I would go shave for your cell at a quarter board." And that was him giving me, what he felt like was really good advice to a seller he really cared about. And I'm like, why? I got a chit. Like, I don't have to, my chit says I don't have to shave. I could carry it on me and everything like that. He was like, "Yeah, but you want to look professional. You're going up for sale at a quarter. You want to look professional. If I was you, I would go shave." Yeah. And I didn't resist. I heard a black officer who had some time and who I respected tell me to go shave. And I went and I shaved. And I think I got sell at a quarter that quarter, but I definitely went and shaved. So that was my experience with PFB. I don't get bumps like that anymore. I kind of changed some of my routines.
Right.
I will still bump up depending on how I shave, what I use. I'll still bump up. But that was my experience with it. And when I think back about it, he was wrong. You know, like just straight up, he was wrong. But he had good intentions. He was trying his best. He was trying to be the best mentor he could be. But that wasn't right. And like you said, if we don't have enough advocates for change, then we won't make those changes.
No. Well, you know, it's funny. I have two friends right now that are, one's a CMC on the Stout with Des as a beard. Nate Rowland, who's a Desron deputy commodore on deployment right now, does. And then Sean White, who is a great naval officer headed to Destroyer Command, has a beard. So this issue of professionalism and beards, to me, is just reflective of a bias, right? So, you know, I looked into where I discovered too is there was a study done by some Air Force dermatologists about 2021. Their patients were complaining about stuff like you talked about, you know, hey, being a little bit disadvantaged or pulled aside or getting a talking to or something. And they felt like it was hurting their careers. And at first they dismissed them. They were like, you're just being wanky, you know. And I said, well, let's do a study. So they actually took out, these are professional researchers, and they pulled out the records of 10,000 airmen. And they, you know, when you do research, you try to isolate like one factor and see if there's a relationship between other stuff, right? So they took out like their age, their rating, their race, all this stuff. And they looked at the ones that had beards and the one that didn't have beards. And they found that if you have a beard, you promote to E6 about 250 days behind your peers on average. So basically the presence of a beard, because if you had, you know, there's a chance if you had not shaved your beard, you wouldn't have got sailor of the quarter because there's a bias because they didn't say you look professional, right? And so that adds up in terms of fit reps or evals, in terms of assignments. You know, I was at Vista Point the other day here on the Norfolk Navy base, and they were doing a retirement ceremony for a carrier, you know, sailor. And I was talking with one of the sailors there who was in his whites and stuff. But he had a beard. And I said, why aren't you in the honor guard? And he goes, you can't be in the honor guard if you have a beard. You know, and this is 2024. Like, there's no rule that says you can't. That was just a policy on that ship. But by not being in the honor guard, now he doesn't get an eval bullet that he was part of the ship's honor guard. Now he doesn't, you know, so it adds up. And so they found this. So basically and so, you know, here's this policy that also the other thing, you know, you talk about, you know, your current, it talks about, you probably tried those creams, those depilatory creams and the shaving kits and all that stuff. I'm told they don't work very well. I'm told that they hurt a lot, right? So we force you down this path of, you know, self-torture. Well, first shave it off and let me count the bumps, right? And then put this cream on, put Nair on your face, and then put this other lotion on so the Nair doesn't burn. And you sign a page 13 that says, you know, I will strive to be, you know, crazy. But try to have that conversation with a senior leader, and you know, you won't last 5 minutes because, like, well, they just need to suck it up, right? Or I had a very senior person say, well, they have a chip, they can have a beard. The end of story. And I'm like, no, that's just the beginning of the story, right?
Right.
And so then you have the face mask thing, right? So, oh no, people will die if they put on a face mask. And I'm no disclaimer, you know, these are my opinions, but I'm in safety department at Surfland, and so I was part of the beard study, but I can't talk about it because it hasn't been released, right? I don't know if you're tracking that SecNav order study of face mask efficiency.
We're waiting. Waiting.
We are.
So I can't comment on the details of the study, but I can say that you know, when you study things multiple times, you tend to get about the same answer. And multiple studies have been conducted that showed us in various conditions that small, you know, short facial hair has minimal impact on forced air breathing apparatus, right? Because if you think about it, the air blows out, right? So if you have a little bit of leakage, you might have a little bit shorter, but you're not going to get gases coming in typically and stuff. But at the end of the day, the other thing is, you know, half or 2/3 of the Navy is not on a ship, doesn't wear a gas mask anyway. So the gas mask piece is kind of a red herring. I don't know if I can say BS on this episode, but it's kind of a BS.
You can say whatever words you want.
It's kind of I kind of throw the BS flag because, everybody on shore duty could wear a beard right now. There would be zero safety implication, right?
Yeah. So why not? Why not?
I think there's three reasons. I think the first reason is the biggest reason is I think there is still a perception in people's minds that clean shaven equals professional and beard equals unprofessional, right? Now again, but that's the point of this whole story is that plays out in terms of assignments and evals and stuff.
Right.
And it's not found in any science or any fact or any, every other country, the people have beards in the military and it's no big deal, right? Mm-hmm. I grew a beard the moment everybody retires, even the senior officers, every flag officer I know retired, there's a beard, right? So if it was unprofessional, why would I grow it?
Right.
There's that. So I had one of the publications that I submit to when I submitted a second article on this. They said, well, it's kind of a niche issue, John. And I said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, it only affects a small group of people. And I said, yeah, the black ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not a racial issue in that it's not a pure racial issue. But if you do the math, 40 to 60% of black men have PFP, and 80% of people that have PFP are black men, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So when you make a policy that causes negative impacts on people with PFP, who does it impact? Black sailors. And to call it a niche, to me, is very dismissive of, it's almost like saying, well, it only affects women, so we're not going to write about it because it's not important. That's a niche.
Yeah.
And so I think it's that, I'll probably regret saying this, but if white people got PFP, then we'd have a beard policy, right? That you could grow a beard. If men had babies, there'd be different policies for pregnancy and miscarriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because who's making the rules?
That's the majority.
And again, it would require, I think, a second and third order level of listening to get past what you thought you knew. The first quiz question, can you pronounce what PFP stands for? And if you can't, then you have to listen to the second phase of it. So there's that. And I think there's just, there's a resistance to change in general. One of my old sailors, I had a former sailor join me in the safety department here. We were talking about sleep policy, and he goes, well, sir, you know why people are resisting this, right? I said, no. He goes, there's two things sailors hate, the way things are and change. And so the fact that I joined the Navy in 1980, lots of folks had beards then. It wasn't until October of 84 that they mandated the shave off. It's funny, I was at Nuke Power School and all these instructors had big beards. Back then, they didn't keep you at a quarter inch. It was like an inch or so. There were some pretty hefty beards there. And they all shaved them off and put them in Ziploc bags, brought them in and threw them on the desk in protest. All this beard in a bag on October 1st, 1984. So I hope, I will say that you probably noticed this, is I do see more folks with beards now in uniform, at the gate guard, in the office. Our flag rider had a beard. It's become less of a thing. So I think the normalization is happening. I just wish that the instruction would be updated. I don't think it matches medical science. I don't think it matches today's society. I think it would help recruiting. I think it would help retention. Sorry, go ahead. I'm
what about you?
Here, so I don't,
yeah, that's great. That's great, man. But that was the question I was coming to anyway. Could a simple policy change like allowing beards on shore duty really improve morale and retention rates? And then what would it mean for inclusivity in the Navy?
Right. Well, for inclusivity, I think it would give you, so two examples. I have a friend that's in recruiting. I say a friend. We met through LinkedIn. We talked on the phone a few times. Mike Allen. He's a recruiter with a beard. And he says that it's amazing how people come up to him and say, I had no idea you can have a beard in the Navy. And so, he thinks as a professional recruiter, that it would be a discriminator or a difference, a positive change in recruitment. One of the graphs they found in this study was that the number of chits in the different pay grades dropped dramatically after E5. So E5 to E6, let's say it was 20% of the population at E5. It's like 15 at E6 and then like 5 at E7 and it drops to 0. So what's happening? Two things are happening. Either like you, folks have decided that, hey, I'm just, at my new pay grade, I need to look more professional. I don't want to deal with it. And so I'm going to shave it. I don't want to deal with the hassle. So they're conforming, right? I'm not trying to beat you up, but that's, it's at some point you just say, hey, look, that's I choose my battles, right? And the other is they're getting out. And so is that, so I've had folks say, well, BS, John, that's not, not having a beard is not what's going to drive me out of the Navy. I said, no, but you don't get out of the Navy for one thing. You get out for a multitude of reasons, right? Family or work or whatever. And it's just one more thing. So why not take that one thing away? And as there's no way to know unless you try it, right?
Right.
And so yes, I do think it would help. I'll tell you, when I did a beard contest, we were on San Jacinto on a 7-month deployment. We were out for like 125 days straight. And XO was just all over me to do a beard and a ponytail contest. And I'm like, no, last time I did it, I got in a lot of trouble. And so I finally acquiesced after like 60 days out because I wanted to grow one. So I'm like, well, screw it. I'll just grow one and let everybody else. And so we sold like MW1, which is probably illegal too. I think the statute of limitations has run out. No, it's not. NCIS at my door. So we sold no shave chits and ponytail chits, and we used that for a party in the Seychelles and with MWR. And I thought I was getting away clean, and then we pull up for an unrep one day, and there's a camera crew on this Canadian oiler, and they're filming a documentary for like C-SPAN or something on underway replenishments in the Navy.
Really?
And sure enough, there's my stupid face looking like this. And, and of course the camera's like 30 feet away, so I was on CNN with a beard, and, but it was, I've never seen anything, boost people's spirits so quickly. Maybe it was the rebellious nature of it or something, but at the end of the day, people were like, hey, I don't have to shave. Plus just not having to shave is kind of nice, man. I'll tell you, when you retire, I retired on October 1st of 2013, went on a Caribbean cruise and forgot my razor and, left it at home and didn't shave. And then I got back after 2 weeks and I was ready to shave it back off. My wife's like, no, I kind of like it. And so, I haven't shaved since, I'll trim it up a little bit. But, so anyway, I guess my point is that, what's the harm, right? I think I looked at, 1/3 of American males have a beard. So I think what would happen if you change the policy is everybody would grow one, like every single person. And then half of their spouses would be like, that thing's got to go. The Brits even have a policy, if you really can't, some people just can't grow a beard and they probably shouldn't.
Right.
Then they tell them not to, they make them shave, right? So, but it's just like women's hair. I mean, there was a time, I had a Master Chief tell me the other day, an active duty Master Chief say that she thinks that ponytails are unprofessional. He's like, that's my opinion. That's the way I was raised. Because we were driving through the gate and there was a gate guard that had a ponytail. The same thing with, some of the African-American hairstyles, cornrows and stuff like that. But that doesn't affect my professionalism. That doesn't affect my ability to do my job. So why stick to a policy that makes people feel they're less than or feel that they can be picked on, and every single person that I talked to in that listening group had been stopped by somebody else and taken to task for having phase light, right? In fact, one guy said he was stopped 9 times in his first week at Surfland by different people. One of them wanted to measure his beard. Like they literally wanted to go grab a ruler and pull his beard and measure it to make sure he was in spec. It's like, really? So I don't know, that's my position is, I hope that, I've handed that article to MCPON, I've handed it to VCNO, I've handed the copy to SecNav. I know they've read my stuff. I hope someday, to be able to have a formal, detailed discussion about it. But, I just find that people just don't want to entertain that discussion in the first place.
Yeah. Well, you right about getting pulled, because it just happens, man. Like I was going through the chief season, and I had a beard then, and like some chief came up, some like chief or senior chief, salty, came up to me as a chief select and just started chewing me out about my beard, you know,
Right.
and then asking to see some paper out of my pocket.
Right.
I'm like, hey, I don't have to show you that. And then after that, he got real bad.
Like he didn't even know the policy himself. So the other thing I'll tell you, and again, you make your own decisions, but when I talked to the CMC on Stout, he goes, the other thing that happens is junior sailors come up to me and say, hey, thank you for setting the example that it's okay to have a beard as a senior leader. Now I have somebody I can look up to. And so, you know, I've had several senior people, the captain told me the same thing. He's like, junior officers come up to me and they're like, wow, I never thought you could have a beard as a captain. That really inspires me, you know? So grow that beard, baby. Let it go.
I got a question for you. It's about budget.
Watch, he changed the subject pretty quick, didn't he?
No, because like it's you know, you're making me think about it. You know what I'm saying? So I've actually been thinking about it anyway. I was talking to my captain about it because we just got a suspicion that something might be coming soon, and we could be wrong. But I just think around the holidays we might get some good news about beards. I'm kind of hoping, but I'm probably.
I've heard rumors, but I've been hearing rumors for a long time, so I don't know. I'll put $20 in an envelope, and if the policy changes, I'll mail it to you. How's that?
Yeah. It's crazy because I had mine up through the latest change. So I had mine, and I was so it was a point where you could go command to command without like being reevaluated and all that. So I had it up until my first ship as a chief, and then that new policy change dropped with the whole reevaluation, and it pissed all the guys with beards on the ship.
Because it's freaking stupid, right? I mean, it's a chronic condition. So why do you have to get reevaluated? You know, I have gray hair. I don't have to get reevaluated every year to prove that my hair is gray, right? I mean, it's the same thing. Anyway, I sincerely hope that. I guess the last thing, I don't want to do a whole broadcast on just beards, but it is fun. Back to your point, you made a great point, Dave. I don't think I can carry the football across the finish line. I think it has to come from people that are directly affected by it. And that may come at a cost, right? But you know, somebody being you, right, to raise their hand and say, hey, this is McPawn, this is jacked up, right? And let's get past the you yelling at me and saying, oh, you know, don't look, you just want to look pretty, right? Do you really understand the medical condition? Do you really understand what it feels like putting air on your face, right? Do you really understand what it feels like to have somebody stop you in a passageway? You know, John Long, my friend, who is a senior chief now, was the Missileer of the Year, right? For the Aegis War, which is a huge deal. I don't know what rating you guys were, but, you know, for the Aegis folks, that's like one guy in the Navy every year in the BMD world. And they would not publish the story of his award with a picture of him with a beard, you know? And so he had a choice of, you know, shave your beard and have a photograph in the newsletter with your award, or we're just going to publish a story with no picture, you know? And so, but I think, you know, I've seen people speak up, but it comes, you know, it can come at a cost. But I think that's what's going to have to happen is the active duty folks are going to have to force that conversation on senior leadership in some forum. Because like you said, I've become kind of a lightning rod for it. I think people would just turn me out. You know, it kind of, did I explain the hat? I think I talked about it before the camera started rolling, but
you didn't. Go ahead.
Oh Lord. Okay. Change the subject. So I mentioned my friend Keith Green. I'm gonna plug his book, Black Officer, White Navy. About our third article, and the second or third time we presented something, he sent me this hat, and he calls it the Strange White Man's Club. And he's always giving me a hard time about everything. And he sent me. One of the things I used to on my car when I used to drive through my hometown, like we talked about. I had an Eat More Possum bumper sticker on my car back in the South. And so he sent me one of those, but he sent me this hat, and he goes, "It's only one person in this club. It's you. And it's because you listen, you think, you read, and you go beyond kind of what normal people do when they're trying to dig into a policy, to a topic. Is you look at all sides of it, and then you come back and tell that story. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that. And so, so I wear it proudly. Although I might catch grief for it, but he's been a real mentor to me. But now I completely forgot what you asked me before.
Yeah. Y'all dug into I didn't ask anything, honestly. We were just talking. I had a thought to ask something, but it was more about money and the budget. Like, will we really save money when it comes to like shaving related costs and conditions?
Well, that's a great question. And the answer is yes. The Air Force study found that in terms of, think of doctor visits, right? Like you talked about that reevaluation. You go back for that evaluation, they're paying you by the hour. They're paying that doctor by the hour. I think the savings was about $5.8 million per year. And like 20,000 man hours not spent on doctor visits for a chronic condition that you're reevaluating with no purpose, right? So yeah, there would be monetary savings and time savings. Think about on the ship, all the people gathered around the wash basin trying to shave and getting, hair all over the place. And, you can go to you get a haircut. They just trim the beard with a number 2 gauge, device and take it to a 1/4 inch and you're on your way, So no, it would save money and time. And as you know, I write a lot about manning and sleep and stuff like that. Every hour is precious on the ship when you can get an hour of sleep back. And you could save 20 minutes by not shaving. That's 20 minutes of sleep right there,
Yeah. And it's no cure for PFB, right? It's just the only cure is to not shave.
I was talking with a 3-star admiral, no longer active duty. And I said, well, it's a chronic condition. He says, no, it's not. And I said, well, yeah, it is. He's like, who told you it's not? He said, BUMED. And I said, well, dude, you're a 3-star admiral. They're going to tell you what you want to hear, right? Every dermatologist will tell you that it's a chronic condition. Now, can you mitigate it like you have? Sure. But why would you, right? Like, I doubt you're going to grab a gas mask and put it on and save a burning building up there at NSA Annapolis, right? So there's very little risk involved. And in fact, the last point is, there are sailors out there all over the place with beards on ships. I think Ike Strike Group, we did a count. There were an average, there was 500 on the carrier with a PFB chit, and there was about 25 on each destroyer out there on deployment in the war zone with a beard. So if it's that unsafe, then how can we allow it, right? I mean, I hesitate to say that because somebody's going to drive themselves into the stupid corner and say, oh, let's just ban, people with beards from ships. But that'd be a horrible decision. But the data is there, right? It's not that bad. And if you got into a CBR situation, I would shave my beard, right? If it was, okay, keep my beard or get gassed, okay. Tough decision there.
Beard or die.
I'm shaving, baby.
But so I got a random, it's a random question for you. Paint the picture. It's September 2017. I'm sitting in like a Chiefs meeting. I just made Chief. I just went through the season, just finished the season. And I'm sitting in a Chiefs meeting, and there we about to do a operational pause, the Navy, right? So the Chiefs, we kind of game planning this operational pause because we had a collision in June of that year, the Fitzgerald, and we had a collision. We had a collision in June of that year, the Fitzgerald, and then we had the August collision, which was the John S. McCain.
Yes, sir.
So it's September 2017, and I'm just standing by, waiting for my next moves and instruction. You retired in 2013. Between 2013 and 2017, what were you doing?
Great question. So I retired. Let me back up. I had multiple opportunities to leave the Navy and do something else, but I never found anything I wanted to do more. Or as my sister said, I was too lazy to go to a job interview and do something that I wasn't comfortable with. But I couldn't think of something better. So I stuck for 30. I retired at October 1st, 2013, which, if you remember, was the day of government shutdown, which lasted like 2 months, sequestration, hiring freeze, and so basically there was like, hundreds of 06 of retired people thrown into the marketplace at the same time with no jobs. I was very lucky. It was kind of a different time, But I had kept a card from a group called Maintenance University, which you may have attended at some point. If you did, I apologize for inflicting that pain upon you, but it's like a 3M course, right? But I went through it in my route to Major Command, and I enjoyed it. The teacher was really good and taught us about maintenance and stuff. And I kept the card, and literally the job that I had applied for as I was transitioning, the guy had a heart attack and died. I had nothing to do with it, I swear. But there was a vacancy. And so I took that job, and my wife said, I'm not moving. I love it in Chesapeake. You do whatever you want. Send the paycheck every 2 weeks, and I'll be happy. And but I wanted to stay close to the waterfront. I wanted to stay in Norfolk. I wanted to work with sailors. And so I taught at this Maintenance University course for 6 years. Now back to 2017. So my sort of my passion, the thing that was really driving me in my last 3 or 4 years in the Navy was the sleep thing, right? So in surface warfare, lack of sleep was like a badge of honor, right? Like I went 24 hours without sleep. Oh yeah, I've been 36 hours. And so being tired was just part of being a SWO. And then I discovered, talked about Dr. Nita Shattuck on San Jacinto. We did what's called the circadian watch rotation, which is 3 on, 9 off. You get to 4 section, you stand the same watch every day, you sleep at the same time every day, and you have 9 hours between watches to get sleep. We did this on deployment, and it was life-changing. I mean, I've never seen anything make such a big difference. So I came back from that deployment, and I go from there to Chief of Staff at Surfland, and I'm like, I'm going to change this, right? We're going to change this policy. Oh my goodness. The resistance to that from everywhere, the chief's mess, the engineers, senior leadership. Hey, we've been doing this way for, 5 and dimes for 5 on, 10 off for years, decades. This is the way watch standing is, and we're not going to change it. And so I pushed really hard until I was literally told to stop. It's like, stop talking about it, by another captain that was my boss at the time. And I kind of did, but I kept writing about it. And so we published an article in 2014, called The Sea Change in Standing Watch. Won the ASNE award, won the Naval Institute award. But the Navy just ignored it. And so I continued to push it. And in 2016, this is interesting about the dynamics of leadership, right? So I was called into Surfland. I was retired captain, hanging out contractor, and I get an appointment to go to Surfland to meet with the admiral. And it was Admiral Pat Piercy, and he had a message there. He said, John, I want you to be here because I'm signing out a watch standing policy to improve sleep. This is in May of 2016. And I was like, awesome. And so I went home that night, just floating. Like, I've been fighting this now for 5 years, and something's going to finally happen. And then nothing happened. And I found out that he was told not to release that message by somebody senior to him, because we didn't have enough data, right? We didn't have enough research to show. And I'm like, come on, you've got all this research, you have all this, I've lived it, right? And so that message sat there for another 1.5 years until the collisions happened. And then it was signed out in like a week, because they found fatigue as one of the major contributors to that collision. And so, that's it. It took 7 years and a catastrophe to change the policy. And now we'll never know whether if they had changed the policy, the wrecks wouldn't have happened. There were other factors in there, right? But it just shows how change resistant our organization is. Back to our previous discussions, but so that was kind of the preamble to those collisions. There was a huge, the comprehensive review talked about gaps in training, problems with the steering system on the John S. McCain, with the design of the steering system, but then fatigue was written all over that. So, but when you did that stand down, I don't think that report had been done. So what was the I'm curious from the active duty side, what was the tone of that stand down and what was the message they were putting out?
The operational pause
Operational pause, right.
Yeah. So crazy thing for me was, I'm not sure where I was when we did it because I was TAD in the mess when we talked about it. And it wasn't significant enough for me to remember. So, like I said, so this was September of 2017. Right. I found out in October of 2017 that I was going to my first ship. Because remember, I just made chief. So I was like, and I was TAD at the command that I was at. But I believe it was a 6-hour stand down where we talked about safety and collisions. And, Tish, you remember the stand down, Tish? The operational pause?
Barely, but I remember it, but barely.
Yeah, we honestly shouldn't have like vague memories of it. Like it should be distinct. Right. Like we should have some better memories of this. But yeah, it was an operation. Because I always, like, one of my thought processes, like, if we really want to tackle some of our problems, we would have to do operational pauses, like sometimes to figure out certain things. So this was in line with what I thought, like, okay, we on the right track. Let's do an operational pause. But it might have wound up at some commands being one of those things that people treated like a check in a box. Because it don't have an impact on me. I'm scrambling trying to remember it, and Tish don't sound like she remember it at all.
Right. I think I remember us more so talking about the requirement because I was at SurfPack. So I remember like having to we need to put out, that there's this operational pause. How are we going to track it and all that stuff? Don't quite remember the actual pause, though. I remember everything else swirling funny. Around it.
That's funny. That's interesting. Yep. Well, it's funny you mentioned that, though, because it's been now, 7 years, right? It's October. And so a lot of people in the Navy now have no idea what happened back then, right?
Right.
And it has changed things. We have a policy now. It's not perfect. And, they still don't have enough sailors out there. We actually have, I think, more gaps than we had back in 2017. But they have a lot better seamanship training. They have the training centers in all over the fleet concentration areas. They now have go, no-go tests for the officers when they go to command and XO and stuff. If they don't pass, a sea keeping exam in the simulator, they don't go to the next milestone, right? So there's both better training and more rigor in the process. We have a fatigue policy. And we have the near miss critique program now where you're supposed to share lessons learned and stuff. And I work with that at work. And so it's still not, I don't think it's getting the deck plates like it could or should, but we continue to try to push that out there. And so I think there is a bit of a mindset change that hey, we might, if we're pushing ourselves too hard, it's time to take an operational pause. I do have concern, I was telling somebody the other day that a lot of the conditions that were there in 2017 are being replicated now, right? With a few exceptions. I think the training is better. I think that the controls are better, but we have, manning shortages at ships. So we're sending people temporary duty to fill gaps and getting people out the door. We're getting shot at. So there were tensions in the Pacific then. You were at SurfPack, North Korea was kind of all in the news with missile shoots and stuff. Right. The folks, I talked to the folks on FITS, they thought they were close to a war. They thought they were out there. They were going to be called on to be in combat. And we're in combat now. And so sometimes you take additional risks when you're in combat and you push the envelope more. The longer we stay in this condition, and this is kind of why my job was created, the more we have to be alert to those warning flags that, hey, you look at the recent news where the MSC ships now can't get underway because there aren't enough people, right? They've cut if you saw that, they want to tie up like 17 ships, including the oilers. Well, if we don't have oilers, we don't practice doing unreps. If we don't practice doing unreps, underway replenishments, and we don't get good at it, and then you increase the danger of a collision, right? So, some of those warning signs are there right now. The good news is, I think people are talking about it some and paying attention. We paid a lot of attention to the sailors that came back from this Ike Strike Group deployment. Got a lot of attention to make sure that mental health, resources were there for them. They understood what was available. It was almost funny. I was talking to some folks recently who went through this sort of stress management talk as they were coming home from deployment. And one of the guys is like, I don't know. They're telling me I should be stressed out, but I'm really not. Like, what's wrong with me? Because all I did was my job, right? They shot missiles at us. We shot them down. That's what we trained for. What's the big deal? But it's different times, I think. The Navy hasn't been shooting stuff down, not in my lifetime, not in my 30 years. We shot stuff over the horizon, but nobody was shooting back at us,
Yeah.
And so it's different now. And I think we're still figuring out what that means, But yeah, it's interesting that you don't remember that, though, because I think there was a saying, somebody said the half-life of scared is like 6 months, right? And so you forget after a couple of years. And it's, I know up at Newport, they have a simulator, so everybody goes through a mock-up of those collisions now. So they understand when they go through the officer course, the officer of the deck and stuff like that. So there's a lot of visibility there on that. And there were like 115 items that came out of that study, the comprehensive review. I was just in a meeting today where we're talking about, hey, how many of those were fixed and how many of them are still fixed, and what are we doing to go back? So there are flag level, Master Chief level groups meeting to say, okay, we checked this block, in 2020, is it still checked? Right.
I actually had to put all 150 of them into a spreadsheet to create the tracker for the Admiral for that. Yeah. And that's probably why I don't quite remember the stand down. I more so just remember, because I was a legalman at the time.
Okay.
So I was more so going through the investigation and who's getting fired and the after action report, because before then we didn't track. We would have all these investigations, casualties, and we would have, the recommendations. Yep. But no one tracked the recommendations.
It's funny you say that, because one of the first calls I got, I was a contractor working over, in industry, and I got a call that said, hey, there was this thing called the Belial report, which was an admiral wrote about surface readiness. And it had like 100 recommendations. And people are asking, what do we do about those 100 recommendations? And nobody can even find a copy of the report. So I had a copy of it, and I'm like, well, I got one.
That's
so I think we're not great at that even today, but we're better, I think.
We're a lot better. We at least recognize that, that it is something. We always have the after action reports, and, you kind of don't do anything with them. And it's like, we have all this data. Why aren't we tracking it to make sure it's done? We just kind of send it down range and say, okay, hope that got done.
Right.
Yeah.
There's still some of that, but we, I think, I've been part of a couple safety investigations, and I've been part of a couple of, all these near misses that we do. We try to share that stuff. The challenge is, as it's always a brand new group of people coming out there who are inexperienced and haven't really thought through maybe what could happen. Or like you experienced, and when that first collision happened, what did the Navy say? Oh, that was just a messed up ship with a jacked up crew, didn't know what they were doing. It's their fault, right? And then the second collision happened, and they're like, well, wait a minute.
Right.
Maybe we have a problem. Maybe we are the problem. And so,
especially when you have similarities, like how can this happen in such a short amount of time? If we had shared that information, then maybe something could have been avoided.
Yeah.
And I talked to folks on the McCain who said they heard about the collision on the Fitzgerald, but they didn't really know anything about it. And so you wonder what would have happened if we'd have been a little quicker to share that information.
Right.
Didn't one of those ships have a near miss before they had a collision? Like a week before
that was
they
part
had
of
a
it. I think it was Fitzgerald had a very close call, like either hours or a day before, and it really didn't do much with it, And it was weird. I did the Porter investigation. You guys probably weren't even in the Navy at the time. In 2012, the Porter had a collision. If you look back at the investigations, it was like exactly the Fitzgerald collision. That freighter that they hit was going same course and speed for days, and they ran right in front of it. And the only difference was, and it was one of my friends that pointed this out recently, that the ship that hit the Porter was a huge freighter, and the bulbous bow went underneath the ship, so it didn't pierce the berthing compartment. It was so deep. The draft was so much. That's the only difference. Is that's why people died in the Fitzgerald and not in the Porter. It just hit a bigger ship, so that the keel was underneath. So yeah.
And I guess when people look at these things, they looking at them like, and I'm talking about when people are progressive and they like kind of like saying the sky is falling before it falls. I think people looking at it like it's the alligator that's not closest to the boat. I never really understood that, way of thinking, especially when I kind of couple that with when I read those after action reports, like when I read those like after action reports or those comprehensive reviews and stuff like that. It's about, he's saying like 150 recommended. It's about 30 to 70 of those things that I'm like, yo, we do this. This only looks funny right now because it's in this report. But if this wasn't in the report, it's a standard way of like our living and how we operate. You know what I'm saying?
Right. No, that's a good point. I mean, one of my friends had a saying in MU. He said, there's a right way and the easy way. And our job is to make the right way the easy way.
The easy way.
Because if you go out there and you're, it's like the sleep thing, right? I don't know if you're coming back to that, but if I'm 85% manned and I'm supposed to get, 7 hours of sleep, well, I'm now doing 20% more work, right? 15% more work, which means I'm sleeping 2 hours less. That's why we're tired, right? And so it's kind of simple math, but we still fight that challenge out there with fatigue, just like we did back in 2017. So again, you can put all the policy in place and people think about it now, so it's kind of a thing and people consider it, but that doesn't make you less tired, right? When you have a crazy watch schedule and work to do, and the pump's broken or the radar's broken, I got to fix it, Yeah,
and then we got this mentality, just kind of talking about sleep. We also have a mentality that the sleep is for the junior sailors. So, for instance, most commands I've been to, like senior enlisted officers, they don't even do late sleepers. So you can have the same, you can have the same exact watch. Like we are humans, like we're not like superhuman, right?
Yep.
But you can have the same watch rotation as the junior sailors, and they got late sleepers.
Yep. Well, so what I preach, and the way our policy is written now, and the folks are really following it, then you don't do late sleepers because the lights are out all the time, and in the berthing compartments, and you sleep when you're not on watch, and so. When I was running Sandjack, we went out for I think it was Comp 2X, a big training event. And one of the riders came up and he's like, hey, Captain, this is a pirate ship. I said, what are you talking about? He's like, you don't do quarters, you don't do taps, you don't do reveille, the lights are out. People are working out at 3 a.m. They're running around in gym clothes during the day. And I said, well, yeah, because I want them to be awake and alert when they go on watch at midnight or 3 a.m. That's what I care about, right? And so I got a plan of the day from one of the ships in the Red Sea the other day, and there were only like 4 entries on it. It was breakfast, lunch, dinner, and training. Because the master chief said that, hey, if it doesn't help us shoot down missiles, we're not doing it, right? And so I think that mind shift is taking place. One of my old mentors said that a culture change takes 10 years in the Navy, right? Because the enlisted, the E5s have to become chief petty officers. The chiefs have to become CMC. The divos have to become department heads, and they have to have lived through it. And so, I kind of had an aha moment. I was up at the 40th up in Annapolis in your neck of the woods, sitting around a camp, like a fire pit at my friend's house with this low lieutenant, came off with a couple ships in San Diego. And we got to talk about what he did and what I do and stuff like that. And he starts like this. He's like, are you that sleep guy? And I said, yeah, I guess I am. And he goes, well, thank you. He goes, because my senior folks just kept talking about how much it sucked before and how much better it is now that we shifted to this circadian 3 on 9 off watch. And so I got pretty decent sleep most of the time. This guy was a lieutenant. So, not that always happens, but yeah, we're making some progress there, I think. But it's going to take time. The people who grew up with that have to become the captains of ships and the leaders of ships to really have it take effect and be a culture change.
So we talked about. I think Tisha need to jump off real quick to do.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
Oh, okay.
We talked last week, right? And I wanna talk about the McCain before you go. I do want to talk about the McCain. But I want to dig a little bit deeper into sleep. But we talked last week on our podcast, which is not out yet. We talked about the seller-led maintenance report, the GAO report.
Yeah.
And I saw you have some responses to that report as well. But I think like this conversation kind of goes directly into that, because one of the things I always thought about was it's just not enough time in a day to do everything that the Navy wants us to do, right? And I'm glad you brought up like some of these command master chiefs and these commands are saying like, hey, let's only do what's vital for this mission that we're out here for. Because, you know, regular ship, regular day, nothing shooting at us, nothing to shoot at. We got about 6-7 meetings. It's a meeting in order to get ready for a meeting, a brief in order, you know, to get. So for me and my rate, my rate that I was prior was a electrician, right? Okay. And as an EM, it's hard to get some of that work done throughout the day if you're in a leadership position or you got a collateral or, you know, stuff like that. So I always used to be like, damn, how come we just won't do shift work? Like, can we just, it was one time where I was like, I think I was like, yo, let's just work on our own hours. Let's just work how we want to work.
Right.
You know, and I always thought that we could be a little bit more liberal, you know, with like that, but I never saw that become super popular. But I wonder like if some of what we talking about like the sleep, I think all of that's kind of cooked into like prioritization, tasking, calendar schedules. But I think some of that drops into that seller-led maintenance report as well.
Yep, absolutely. I think, you know, one of the things that we looked at on Sanjak was, you know, you can play with the watch bill, but there's still work to be done, right? As an electrician, you have to do electrical safety checks and tag outs and all this stuff. And one of the places we found some trade space was it turns out that if you actually dig into the instructions, you don't have to be an electrician to do certain electrical safety things like safety check personal gear. And so, you know, seamen can do that. I think I may be quoting wrong, but I think a lot of electrical rating, there's a lot of electrical
it's different ratings. It's different rates. Yeah.
And so we said, okay, those PMS cards are going to come out of E division because we were manned at like 60% electricians. And we're going to put, you know, every department is going to have someone to do electrical safety check. 2M, like the maintenance repair guys, folks, we sent more people to school and got every department to have a 2M manager. So you can look for other areas to share that workload that's not watch related, but you know, mitigate some of that time. The other thing is, like you said, when do you do it? So when we first did the watch rotation on San Jacinto, I'm up on the bridge one morning and I smell food like bacon, like you know, very strong smell of food. And I'm like, what's going on? And this JO I found out he had like a bacon, like an egg McMuffin in his pocket, right? And what I discovered was the meal hours weren't supporting the watch bill. We weren't serving breakfast early enough for the 6 a.m. watch to get breakfast before we came on watch. So they're getting a hookup from the CSs of a breakfast sandwich.
Yeah.
So we called a meeting and said, hey, what did we not think about? And it was a lot. It was, hey, I can't get toilet paper, you know, at night when I'm up. I can't get tools to work. So we shifted the opening hours of the hazmat locker, the tool issue locker, the cleaning gear locker, so that they were open like from noon to 5 p.m. and then from midnight to 5 a.m. And so if you walked around San Jacinto on deployment, you would have found people working at midnight or 2 a.m., but those same people were sleeping at 2 p.m., right? Because their day was offset by 12 hours from the rest of the crew. And we left them alone to earn their time, you know? And so you have to change, when I do my little training on this, I talk about you have to change the watch bill, the daily routine, but you also have to change the mindset that sleep is important, right? Because I want you to be awake when you're, you know, that OOD on the Fitzgerald had the lives of 300 sailors in their hands, you know? I want them to be awake, you know? And so I think, you know, but you're right. But back to that GAO report, and, you know, that's the first time. It's funny, the GAO had been trying for years to get a hold of muster reports, like how many sailors are actually on the ship, not just how many are assigned. And the GAO guy told me the Navy wouldn't give us those reports. And then for this last one, they did. They got a hold of them. And so you're seeing numbers in there. I think it says like 33% below what you're supposed to have.
Yeah, 33%.
Yeah. And so, we have destroyers out there now mustering, a little over 200 people in the maintenance phase on a ship with 300 people assigned. And so you should expect to not get all the work done, right? A lot of, after the Von Armour Shard, a lot of ships dropped to 4-section duty or 3-section. We're starting to change the rules to get them out to 5 and 6 section, but 4-section duty is tiresome after a while too.
Yeah, that's 4-section duty.
It's terrible.
Crazy.
So lots of work going on to try to get that fixed, but we got to get people trained and get them qualified and get them out there. But you also have what you have. I mean, I was the N1 at Surflat 15 years ago. And the number of gapped billets is about the same today as it was then. So that's probably not going to change. So, people that tell you it's going to get better next year, it's probably not. We need to work with what we have, but be reasonable about it. And sometimes something's not going to get done,
Yeah. Well, we always had this. It was always that's probably gonna be kind of funny, but it was always this saying that if we add more man hours to a job when we claim to work, that we would get more people. But I don't know that that's true.
I think that assumes a level of efficiency in the system that doesn't exist, right? Because they don't change those things that often. No, a lot of that stuff they either do. In my maintenance university job, I looked into this sometimes. Some of that stuff has some science behind it. A lot of those numbers are really just sort of, a bunch of guys sitting around the table saying, well, it took me 2 hours. Well, it took me 3. Okay, we'll call it 2.5. Put that in the card. And, but they have done some manpower studies, and tried to validate a lot of that stuff. And so, they use that data, but I don't think you're going to see, anytime soon, any change from something like that. It takes years for that to kind of work through the system. But now I heard that too. It's like, come in every day and put 8 hours in for painting or something, put a job in the morning and close it at night. Well, one thing, the sailors are going to find a way to work the system. I think, but they have done studies that show that if you just, there's science that says, hey, it takes this long to do this. And if you add up the stuff on a sailor's workday, it adds up to more than the normal, 10-hour day. But the other thing is that we're so good at just getting it done, that it doesn't raise a flag, right? Because it doesn't get reported as not done, Yeah.
And it probably should raise a flag sometime. Like if somebody, and I've seen it where I've seen a lot of stuff, but I've also seen it where somebody would say, hey, it's done. Don't ask me how it got done. Right. It got done.
Right. Yeah. And that can be dangerous. I've been down that road. But you talked about the McCain a little bit. One of the things that gets me in trouble sometimes when I talk to my NAVC friends is I firmly believe that when we talk about the root cause, right, of stuff, that I think the root cause of the McCain collision was the steering system. We put a system on that ship that was not well tested. It didn't have proper documentation. If you look back, they court-martialed the BMC butler, on that ship for not properly training his crew, right? And they demoted him to E6 and forced him to retire. I have tried to challenge the Navy to go back and revisit that decision because what they found, even in our investigation, they found that the training manual didn't exist, right? The tech manual had not been signed out yet. He asked for people to come train his crew and was told there was no one available. So, how much more would you, so people will say, well, he should have just said, no, we're not going to operate the system.
Yeah.
But we're not trained that way, right? But I do think that, one of the lessons that I've seen is people are today a little more willing to stand up and say, hey, you haven't given me a system that's properly documented, or there's training for it. And we shouldn't accept it, right? I mean, you wouldn't buy a car if the dealer said, well, I haven't quite finished testing the steering gear, but it should be fine, and so we shouldn't accept that on the ships.
Yeah, and sometimes we like some of us just embrace this. I remember being at the Naval Academy, embracing the suck. We had got like a brand new fleet of the Yard Patrol Craft, the 700 class, right? You're probably a little familiar with them.
Yep.
But we didn't know, like as ETs and EMs and electricians, we didn't know how to fix them at all. The only people we could call were the people like some of the people from like Siemens or the companies that made some of the equipment on it.
Right.
The contractors, and they were not, you know, and I'm not trying to like dig at them, but they weren't American, so it was a language barrier in the conversation. Or it was solely proprietary, so they would have had to come, so we still couldn't fix it. Didn't get didn't get outfitted with any manuals. And then sometimes the companies that we deal with, sometimes they go out of business by the time the ship is done and you know, commission. You can only find these parts on like, so it's a lot of like cracks in some of those systems. But like, again, like you said, a lot of times like we just have made it work. Like, hey, just go out there. I'm going to look at this switchboard for 3 days and figure out what's wrong and make it work. And nobody of a higher authority, right? Because a lot of young people complain about, and when I say young people, I'm talking about more about like junior sailors. And even when I was, a lot of us complain about the people that don't care and stuff like that. But a lot of times people just don't know. They never got the report.
No, that's right. Yeah, it's important to speak up. You know, we had a situation where we installed some software on a ship, and it actually caused a couple of new problems. It solved some old problems, and this was a couple of years ago. And the captain said, "Take it off. I'm not going to install it." And so a couple of us went down there from headquarters to figure out what's going on, and he walked us through what was going on. You know, what the software was doing, and we all decided, "Hey, I wouldn't have signed for it either." And so we went back to the admiral and said, "We should take this off of the ships until it's properly tested and put it back on." And that's what they did. So, you know, that guy caught a lot of heat because other captains had signed off on it, and because nobody brought it up to him. But his team brought it up to him and said, "Hey, if we do this, we get false alarms, you know, and that's going to cause people to like go back to the space and you know, without getting into too much technical detail." He just said, "I'm not going to accept that risk." And so I'm not sure somebody would have done that before 2017, but he did, you know. So, you know, I think we're getting a little better there. But, you know, it's still, like I said, the right way and the easy way. Sometimes people just got to put their head down and fight through it. When they really ought to stand up and say, "Hey, I haven't been trained for this. Or I don't have the tools for this." And stop, you know, before somebody gets hurt.
Yeah, and I think that's hard I think that at times could be hard for like SME leaders, because SME leaders want to be able to say that they could fix something. So like, you know, me talking to Skipper or something, we want to be able to say, "Hey, we could fix this." So the CO is never going to even know how hard it was or how impossible. I'm not going to tell him that. I'm an EMCS. I'm fixing this. I'm coming away with a win, and that's what it is. And then now every time we need to work on it, "Hey, you need to come get me." So
right. Now you're screwed because you're the one who can do it. Yeah, no, I know that story. Absolutely.
Hey, so I want to bring it back to respect real quick, because I don't want to. It's so much we could talk about, man. Now I see why people have you on like multiple episodes of their podcast, because they can't. You can't squeeze everything into one.
Can't pin me down. That's right.
But respect. So at some point, and we actually talked about it on this podcast, but we didn't hear too much more about it. But it was a conversation that came out of, I believe, Task Force 1 Navy, to add respect as a core value. And we actually talked about it, but it like, I think like, that's like the Harriet Tubman $20 bill. Like it just don't get talked about no more.
That's right. There's definitely some parallels there too. I've written a couple articles about that, and you know, egged on by Keith. And so here's my thought on that. Right, we had Task Force 1 Navy, which went out and listened to a bunch of junior sailors. You know, not just minority sailors, but you know, throughout them thousands. They had listening groups, they had stories, and out of that came a general feeling by the junior sailors that they don't feel respected. Right. That by their peers, by their subordinates, or by their superiors. And then that's a paragraph somewhere in the Task Force 1 Navy. And then what's interesting is the Task Force 1 Navy report has, like you said, a list of actions, right? And one of those actions was add respect as a core value. And then in the notes, it says, this recommendation has already been staffed with senior Navy leadership, both officer and enlisted, and is ready for implementation now. In fact, I have a coin. They actually had, my old friend John Naval was chief of naval personnel at the time. He had his coins printed up with respect as a core value. Like the coin itself has honor, courage, commitment, respect. And I have one up on my shelf here because he thought it was going to happen. So the story goes, as I understand, that the Marine Corps said, we're not going to change. And that the SecNav was caught between, do I have two sets of core values, one for the Navy, one for the Marine Corps? And so basically it became sort of a, headbutt between the Navy and the Marine Corps. And then it quietly went away. And so when things quietly go away, that kind of prompts me to write an article about it. So I wrote that article in the Naval Institute, and shoved it in the face. And lots of senior people said that they would try to push that over the edge. Again, I've handed a copy of the article to CNO, to SecNav. I kind of thought when the new CNO came in, that she might jump on that, because to me, it's like a win-win-win, right? In fact, here's how I said it in the article, and I'll say it here. I think it's disrespectful to not do it when your junior folks told you, you don't respect me and you should change it. And then you say, well, I'm not going to change it. But why? Because I don't respect you. Okay, that's my point, right? And so what's the downside, right? Well, I've had actually said someone say, well, any more than 3, nobody can remember. I'm like, really? Maybe you can't, but other services have respect as one, right? Yeah. Or they'll say, well, respect is in there, like in the subparagraph bullet 2 under honor, and so to me, though, adding respect would do 3 things. One, it would say we listen to you, right? Which to me is the most important. Secondly, you look at our data on sexual assault, sexual harassment, bullying, they're horrendous, right? If I respect you, I'm not going to sexually harass you, right? And so make it about that. Make it about turning the corner on this culture of excellence and everything, right? If you look at that placemat, I thought it was kind of funny on the placemat, they actually left room. If you look at the corner, it says honor, courage, commitment. There's like a blank because they were so close to getting respect added, but it didn't happen, right? Yeah. So there's still room for it. So I say add it, right? Yeah. The second thing is that, in my opinion, honor, courage, and commitment are about me, right? That's about me as a person. When I add respect, it becomes about us. It becomes about the team. It becomes about other people and how you treat me and I treat you. And to me, that would send a powerful signal. And so I think it aligns perfectly with honor, courage, and commitment. And I think it aligns perfectly with culture of excellence that they're trying to, the new sort of thing. And there's no downside to it. And so it's difficult for me to understand why we would take imagine let's say you're a command senior chief, right? Yeah. So you did a poll of your sailors on the command, and they said, we all think that, this sign should come down, or this thing is offensive to us, or we think this thing changed. You would do one of 2 things. You as a leader, you would say, thank you for that recommendation. We've thought about it and we're going to take it, right? Or you would say, thank you for that recommendation, but we're not going to take it, and here's why. The Navy has done neither. The Navy has just gone silent. And to me, that's kind of coward, right? Hey, if you're going to make a decision, make a decision. No, we're not going to do it. And then explain why you made that decision. And the problem is there's no explanation for why not to make that decision, right? Yeah. And so, but just to slide this one in there, it's the same thing with the sentence, right? The facts are on the table. The data is there. There's a decision to be made. And we have got to a place where, as a very senior leader, you realize that, hey, I can just wait this one out, right? Cordle's going to retire one of these days. He'll quit writing articles about it. And then people will not bring it back up again, and somebody will relieve me, It'll be forgotten, right? And so I hope I have the opportunity to have that conversation with the CNO or MCPON, because I'd like to see their defense of not changing, right? I just like to hear them. I almost called. I was at a meeting with a CNO was at one of these functions and gave an awesome talk, and I knew her long ago. I haven't seen her in years, but I served with her husband at the time on coal. But I was going to ask her about it, but she gave such a good speech. And this young midshipman came up and said, "How can I get to where you are?" And it was such a moment. And she walked up. She's like, I'm scared to even ask a question, much less be on the stage with you. And CNO pulled her up and gave her a hug. And I'm like, I can't ruin that moment, with this pointed question. But if I had the opportunity, I would ask, hey, two adults, what's the rationale for not doing it? I'd love to hear that answer from MCPON or CNO, but it's not forthcoming. And on the stennis, I know that it would be politically, charged to make a decision like that. But if you look back, I don't know how much you guys have looked into the stennis story, but here's a guy who his life goal was to stop the civil rights movement. Right. He wrote. I found letters. We went looking where hey, your kids should serve in all white units, so you don't have to interact with people of other races. Right. That was his core belief. That was his core values. Right. He actively stopped Black Americans from getting nominations to the Naval Academy. You go back and look, not a single Black American got a nomination out of Mississippi for his entire tenure. And so, he's the reason, and his compadres, that the Naval Academy has such poor diversity today, because they killed a generation of leaders. They stopped them from getting in there so they could be mentors for the next generation. And so when people say, well, that's in the past, and no, that's today, right? And that ship's going to sail around. I got to like Keith. Keith has a great way of putting me on the spot. So I asked him, I said, so let me ask you, I said, because if you look at Wikipedia for Sir Senator Stennis, it says he's a segregationist, right?
Yep.
And then, so I asked Keith, I said, well, so Keith is a segregationist, a racist. And he does this. He's like, do you understand the irony of you asking me that question? Frankly, if you go to Wikipedia and you click on the word segregationist, the first place it takes you to is racism, right? Because it's a racially based belief. And so, but again, we have the facts on the table, right? We have the article that published in Naval Institute. We interviewed a general, Black general, Leo Williams III, who had to move out of Virginia to get a nomination to the Naval Academy because couldn't get a nomination to the Naval Academy in the 60s as a Black man, right? You had to go, you had to move from the southern states to another state to get nominated. And so, there's lots of other people to name ships after. There's heroes, we have Doris Miller just now, the new aircraft carrier. So how high, the bar doesn't have to be high. It's like, not a racist. So I don't know. I'll probably get in trouble for saying that too. But it's not, the other piece of the Stennis story is we didn't just make this up. This was brought to our attention by sailors on the Stennis, current sailors who feel that they are insulted by that name being on their uniform. They take the uniform off. I served on ships like USS Cole, Medal of Honor winner, USS Oscar Austin, Medal of Honor winner, George Bush, Harry Truman, Artie Burke, right? I could go back and look at their names and say, I want to be that guy. I want to be that person. Yeah. I didn't take the name off for shame when I went home from work, and so why would we do that to our sailors? I don't know. But again, you have the option to be silent, and that's the easy option. And so the Navy has never responded formally to that discussion. It was kind of cool. There's a report that the GAO puts to Congress every year about the naming of ships, right? And it explains how they name ships and why they're named, and they talk about the ones that are in line to be named. And our articles are mentioned in that report to Congress that says some service members have expressed, concern that the segregationist is still on the name of a Navy vessel. But we'll see. We're just hoping it gets changed while it's in the shipyard. Because they did change. 3 or 4 ships got the names changed. Chancellorsville had the name changed. So there's precedent, but and it's not that expensive. It's a can of black paint, really. But no, seriously, I think I found it was like $250,000 to change the name for those other ships. That included all the ball caps and tablecloths and all that crap. So again, back to your point though, beards, stennis, and respect. I mean, you don't get easier wins than any of those 3 things, right?
Right.
I mean, there's no work to be done, right? Oh yeah, it's one message. It's one can of paint. It's a word on a document, right? Just go to the printers and add respect. It's that simple. It would be such a profound statement to the Navy to do that.
And my question for you is like, what are your thoughts, or what do you have to say to like the people that say like these types of decisions and these kind of things is not going to help us win the next war?
That's a great question. And I think my answer to that is what's going to win the next war? It's our sailors, right? It's not our destroyers and our cruisers and our bullets and our missiles. It is to some extent, but they're all built by people that, and so it's about our sailors. And so in my mind, anything that we do today to improve the life of our sailors, to improve their focus on the mission, and to not blatantly disrespect them or somehow minimize the way they feel about the way they're being treated, the more likely they are to stay in the Navy, the more likely they are to excel in the Navy. And so, you don't keep people around by insulting your workforce or by inflicting pain upon your workforce. So just stop doing that. And I think you'll have a better Navy, which will help us win more. There's probably people that got out. I had a Navy pilot tell me, I felt like it was a punch in the gut to land on the Stennis, because it was like, Stennis would not have wanted me as a black man flying an airplane in the United States Navy. And we didn't ship after the guy. So that tells me that the Navy doesn't care about how I feel. I'm going to go work for an organization that does, and so I think, now, is that going to be the difference between winning a war with, China, North Korea, somebody else? Probably not. But again, why not? What's the harm, right? Is letting women wear ponytails going to help win the next war? Well, I don't know. If the CNO, if she had gotten out of the Navy because her hair was falling out because they made her wear some gruesome hairstyle to look good, then we wouldn't have a female CNO, if they hadn't changed some of the policies, pregnancy policies, that kind of stuff, we wouldn't have a female CNO. In fact, she was telling me, part of the story she told was, she was like just about to get out of the Navy because women could not serve in combat vessels. And so one of her mentors pulled her aside and said, they're about to change that policy. You need to stick around. So you'll be one of the ones who is able to take advantage of it because you're right in that zone. And that's exactly what happened. A year later, they changed the policy. But she was about to get out because she's like, I have no future in this organization. So, if the future CNO is, sitting on a ship today and he has a beard or he's on the Stennis and is told multiple times, just get over it, right? We don't really care what you think. He's like, fine, I'm getting out. And now we've lost a future leader. So it's hard. It's hard to prove a negative, but I think, but my pushback to them, and this I learned from Keith, is okay, why not? Like, articulate your reasons for not doing it. I've told you my reasons for doing it. Let's lay those out and see what carries the day. But you got to have that conversation in the first place. I think that's the hard part.
Yeah. And like just to sum up everything you said, my thought process with that, when people say that, is like, we need to be, in my opinion, we need to be connected to what we fighting, like what we're fighting for. Like, and a lot of people are not, if they don't see, and I'm not saying a lot of our sellers aren't, but a lot of people are not if things don't represent them. I mean, that's just what it is. You know, so if I'm on this ship and it's named after this person that I know was a segregationist, and like a major part of like the being at the command, like going for my East-West or whatever it is I'm going for, I gotta know about the namesake. We honor the namesake. We do all this with the namesake. And like I was on a Peralta. We were proud of Rafael Peralta, his family, his mom. We visited her. We had that Peralta pride, and we still do. You know, and to like know you celebrating somebody again that didn't respect that word, right? Respect, didn't respect people like you, didn't respect you. It's kind of hard to buy into like something that's like small, something that's foundational as the command culture. Like it's kind of hard to buy into that.
But you're not going to find any of those words on any documentation on the John C. Stennis, right? If you look at their command brochures, or you go into the room, or you're on the ship, that's not something that's front and center. It's part of a sailor going up for an East-West board on the Stennis is probably not going to mention the word segregationist, right? He's going to say, I was talking with a guy on there. He goes, "Who's the father of the modern Navy?" I was like, "Well, okay." He was a politician who lobbied for money for the Navy, which is important, right? But there's that asterisk, right? So I don't know. But you're right. Will the world end if they don't change the name? No. But it, you know, other ships are only around for 25 years with somebody's name on them. So it's not like he hasn't had his time in the sun, you know. Give it to somebody else. Plus, he's dead. He doesn't care, you know. So, and again, I don't want to insult his family or sailors on the Stennis. There's a lot of good sailors who've served on there, officers and sailors. But, you know, would they have been a little more motivated by somebody's name on the hull who was a true hero who could be emulated, like, you know, Oscar Austin, who, you know, black 19-year-old Marine who took out, you know, machine gun nets of North Vietnamese and saved. In fact, I met the guy who he saved when he died at the change of command of one of my friends who took command of the ship. You know, two 19-year-old Marines, and Oscar Austin basically took a hand grenade, shoved it into the enemy, and then hugged him as the enemy was about to jump on his friend. And so this gentleman spoke at the change of command, and you talk about it moving. He's like, I was ashamed. I didn't reach out to his family for 20 years because their son died to save my life. And when I did connect with them, they embraced me like their own son. They said, you have brought Oscar back to us, you know? So that's the kind of connectivity you have with the ship's namesake. And we're stealing that from the generation of sailors. We don't change that name. So,
hey, John, so I feel like you get a lot of energy from young sailors. I think that, like, you know, that's I'm happy that you're still around young sailors to get that energy. What keep outside of that, like, what keeps you driven and motivated to do what you're doing?
That's a great question. My wife asks me that all the time. She's like, "Will you knock this off because you're going to get yourself fired or nobody cares?" You know. It goes right back to that junior sailor. You know, I had one of the most moving experiences in this job was we put the new physical throttles, the new design after the collisions, on a ship, and this 18-year-old sailor, we were talking about it, and I'm like, "Well, do you know what this does? You know what that does?" And he looks at me and goes, "You know, sir, this is the most complicated thing in my life right now, and I have no idea how it works." And I'm like, how terrible is that we did that to that sailor, you know?
Right.
And so you know, little wins where we went back and we took that feedback and we redesigned it, and we took the time to answer the bell from like 10 seconds down to 2 seconds, you know, through engineering. And so little wins like that keep me going. And I think it's the junior sailor, it's that lieutenant that said, "Hey, you're that sleep guy, right?" And so it's little examples that you can make a difference. You know, I had who was I talking to the other day? LinkedIn's great because you get all these crazy people, crazy connections that, you know, "Hey, you were my captain back when, you know, 20 years ago." And I gave this guy a yellow sticky. He did a good spot check, and I left a yellow sticky on his desk. I said, "Good job today." The guy saved that yellow sticky, and he still has it, you know. He's like, because nobody ever told me, like it'd been 2 weeks since anyone had told me that I did a good job. You know, No, I know what it was. I was on a ship last week, and I was talking 2 weeks ago. And we got to talking with this lieutenant. Traino was walking me onto the ship. And I said, "What's your background?" Well, I was an ET-2 nuke on the USS Ford. And I had a conversation. I was the phone talker, and the reactor officer, who became an admiral, asked me how I was doing, and ended up spending 20 minutes talking to me, which led to a discussion about the Seaman Admiral program, which I had never heard of. And then I looked it up, and then he helped me write my package, and now I'm a lieutenant, you know? And so, I think the ability to kind of help junior folks with my experience, is what keeps me going. It does take a toll. I've had days when I'm like, this is enough, right? And then once in a while, I get a note from a former sailor or something that says, "Hey, thanks for doing this because this helped me along." But that's what keeps me going. Occasional note on LinkedIn or Facebook that says, "Hey, I remember the day when you brought a dog back on Oscar Austin and we took it on deployment, and the dog made my day, Now, they have this little, you see this little diagram sometimes. It's like, what you love doing, what you can make a living at, and what makes a difference. And the good news is most of the Navy kind of lives in the center of that circle. I'm sure, you clearly do, both of you, because you stayed around, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that every morning when I get up, is that I'm still in the center of that mass. But, the last thing I wanted to add though is, everything has a time, and, I've been married for 31 years. And at some point that becomes the most important thing in your life is your family. And so, we're going through the struggle of when does the clock tick out, and so that's why one of the reasons I do these podcasts and stuff is I'm hoping that people will listen or pick up that flag and run with it. And I can hand it off to somebody who is willing to be as vocal and as passionate as I have been. And it comes at a cost, right? I mean, I checked all the blocks to be a flag officer, but I probably pissed off enough people that I didn't, go through the right wickets there. And as one guy told me, you spent too much time at sea, right? Because I never did a DC tour or joint tour. But I did exactly what I loved every day. And so I don't look back and, as a new captain, I got paid more than a 2-star admiral anyway. I said, you can have that. But no, I had a great career in the Navy, and I'm glad I'm able to give a little bit back. And, but there's no more room. And you're a command senior chief, right? You walk around the deck plate. I always tell people, the gift that I give all my, when I'm going to give any kind of leadership speech, is, I call it the third question, right? You're walking along the P-way, you see that sailor and you say, "How you doing?" And what do they say?
I'm good.
I'm good, right?
Yeah.
Then you say, "What are you up to?" What do they say?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Nothing, right? Yeah. Or they go, I don't want to say nothing because they'll think I'm goofing off. So I'm doing a spot check. I got to go fix it.
Super work stuff.
So most people end the conversation and keep going, but stop and ask them, what's bugging you? What's pissing you off today? And that third question will win them over, right? Because they'll 100% something's bugging them, and they'll unload on you. And the good news is, especially in your position, you can probably solve their problem right there 75% of the time. The other 20%, who can solve that problem. And you can walk them over to the chaplain or the doc or the 3MC or whoever. And then what will happen is that sailor will remember that you took the time to listen to them and to help them. And they'll never forget. And years from now, they'll come back as a senior chief or a master chief, and they'll remind you of the time that you stopped to talk to them. And so that third question is kind of my gift to the listeners. Try it. But have time, right? Because something is pissing that guy off or that gal off. And they're going to tell you, right? But then they'll go home and tell their spouse, "Hey, they will listen to me. They pay attention. They paid attention to me, and I matter to him, right?"
Yeah.
And to me, that's the most important thing. If they feel like they matter to you, they'll follow you anywhere, right? And so that's kind of my lesson from my 30 years plus in the Navy, with working with people. And but no, I don't know. now I'm really babbling. You guys got me up past my bedtime here, so
it's all good, man. I mean, it's appreciated. You know, it's appreciated. Thank you. I mean, I'm happy to know you still close to the ground. I'm happy to know you trying to, you know, it's like no offense, it's like a aging Bruce Wayne, you know, trying to make sure that Dick Grayson is, you know, ready to go and and take up the mantle, you know. And
you have some really good, and now I like your. I'm not sure I like that one all that much. But,
hey, Bruce Wayne ain't a bad person.
No, he's good looking dude, man. But you know, one of my coworkers, as I was heading up to Annapolis, he was like, "I had no idea you were that old." He's like, "All your friends must be dropping like flies. Like, how do you maintain such a good attitude?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm not that old, you know." Yeah. But I think back. I mean, I look at you. I'm sure you had the same way. You look back at like your first captain. You know, the old man, right? I mean, my first captain. Man, that guy's old. Well, he was way younger than I am now. You know, so. Hey, I'll take it. But the gray hair has been there since I was like 19, as I was reminded of at the Annapolis days. But hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. This has been a great experience for me. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it.
It was a great conversation. I think I was just kind of stuck just listening to you and the things that you were saying. And I know a few times when you were speaking and I'm just like, man, was he just ahead of his time? Because it seems like the Navy's like turning this curve and it's just like, man, if we could just like throw him back into the fire.
If they just listen to me.
Right. Just throw him
sometimes
back
I feel like you guys are probably too young to remember the Muppet Show, but the Muppet Show had these two old men up in the balcony, just harump, you know. Sometimes I feel like that's me.
But it's very much appreciated though, like, you know, to have someone who's speaking on things that matter to people who are still in. A lot of times, you know, you retire and you're like, oh, that's not my issue anymore. And you're still taking it on and asking those hard questions because they can't fire you, you know?
Well, they could.
I guess they can. I
guess we'll find out, right?
You work for the Navy. You still work for the Navy, right?
I'm sure I can write a book or something. But, you know, it's funny. I don't know if you've heard the name Raymond Kemp. He's a retired Master Chief.
Ray Kemp.
Ray Kemp. Yeah, he wrote me an email one time. I met him through a friend. His email says, for there to be real change, there must be empathy from the unimpacted. And I thought that was pretty profound. Like, you have to care about stuff that doesn't benefit you. It doesn't, but if it benefits somebody else and doesn't hurt you, then why the hell not? Right.
Right.
And so, you know, I've learned a lot from guys like him, guys like Keith. Dr. Shattuck has been, you know, she just retired. She was a mentor to me in the sleep stuff because she was screaming at the wind. You know, she wrote a paper in like 2005 called The Hollow Force. That was talking about you know, how manning shortages were gonna gut the Navy, and you know, I think that still rings true today. So, but no, thank you very much, and please tell your captain I said hi. Tell Chris I said hello. And shoot him the link to the podcast when it comes out. But this has been fun. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Thank you for standing on the front lines for diversity, equity, inclusion, human relations.
You can't say that.
Everything.
He's like, no.
Yeah, I think it's human relations.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Vomit emoji.
Yeah. Have a good night. I'm gonna keep following you. I'm sure Tish will. So we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you both. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.